Picture this. The world's second largest passenger ship, Queen Mary, speeds through the North Atlantic Ocean completely greyed out with portholes blocked. Aboard are troops, lots of them. An entire division's worth, 16,000 men crammed into bunks in every conceivable space. Not even the swimming pool is spared, it's been drained, and men sleep in that as well. It's a nightmarish kind of arrangement, a claustrophobe's idea of hell, but it has to be done. Queen Mary is the fastest ship in the world. She can blitz across the North Atlantic in just a few days. It makes her, and her sister ship Queen Elizabeth, both vital assets in this global conflict, which now means hundreds of thousands of troops from Canada and America will have to find their way across U-boat-infested waters to serve in the European theatre. The Queen Mary's wartime career is an epic. She'd play an invaluable role for the war effort, transporting the better part of 800,000 troops to the battlefields they were desperately needed at. It wouldn't all be smooth sailing. Queen Mary was stalked by German submarines desperate to sink her, nearly capsized by a monstrous wave, and tragically involved in a horror collision that cut her escort ship in half. By war's end, the Mary had carved her name in history and earned a moniker, the Grey Ghost. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. In this new series, we'll look back at Queen Mary's extraordinary wartime career, the soaring highs, the crushing lows, the incredible story of history's greatest passenger ship, and more. War came suddenly for the passengers and crew of Queen Mary. In fact, they learned the terrible news when they were mid-ocean. August 1939, and the world is on the verge of great international conflict. For months, Germany's aggressive expansion and disregard for restrictions imposed by the treaties of the First World War have pushed Britain, France, and their political allies to the edge of reason. Now, it seems that there can be no appeasing Hitler. At sea, life continues on as normal, with the world's great passenger ships maintaining their schedules and steaming warily for ports like Quebec, Liverpool, Southampton, Cherbourg, and New York. On August 30, Cunard's Queen Mary sets out from Southampton, but it's an unusual departure. There's a feeling of impending doom in the air, even as luminaries and celebrities like J.P. Morgan Jr., entertainer Bob Hope, and famed author of All Quiet on the Western Front, Erich Maria Remarque, step aboard. None of her crew, officers, and passengers know it, but this will be her last peacetime voyage for 7 long years. By the 31st, as she steams along at 30 knots and passengers enjoy the luxuries to be had aboard, German tanks and troops have already assembled at designated points along the Polish border, ready to sweep into the nation. The next day, with the Cunard Giant just a couple of days away from arrival in New York, the shocking announcement comes. It's happened. The invasion has begun. Next day, passengers are shocked to see hundreds and hundreds of portholes and windows blacked out across the ship. They're nervous, and rightly so. Captain Irving requests that Bob Hope puts on a show to calm them and lighten the mood.
What tragedies, what horrors, what crimes has Hitler and all that Hitler stands for brought upon Europe and the world.
The very next day, Great Britain declares war on Germany. Then, west of Scotland and bound for Montreal, the liner Athenia is sunk by a U-boat, killing over 100 passengers and crew. Britain's merchant fleet is being hunted from below, and the Queen Mary is no exception. Completely blacked out, and with a British warship alongside as escort, she raises steam and races for neutral New York, arriving the next day where she comes to rest at the Cunard Pier, awaiting her fate. Remarque, who had written history's greatest anti-war novel, was stopped by the press as he stepped off the ship. This will not be a war on the front, he told them. It will be a war on women and children. The words would prove to be chillingly prophetic. Upwards of 55 million civilians would be dead by 1945. This was the bizarre, sudden set of circumstances that saw the world's most famous liner berth alongside her rival, Normandy, and eventually her brand new running mate, Queen Elizabeth, for months at the start of history's bloodiest conflict. But even before the outbreak of war, Queen Mary had played an important role for many families. Jews fleeing Germany that could afford it booked passage on the ship, but all too often they left with barely the clothes on their backs as possessions and money were seized. In one particularly famous example, a young family fleeing were held by the Gestapo at the border while paperwork was sorted. They were 6 hours late, and they would miss Queen Mary's departure from Cherbourg. A call ahead was received at the French port, and the Mary's skipper, Robert Irving, decided to wait for them. An incredible act, given the strict and unrelenting schedule the great liners had to maintain across the Atlantic. But by early 1940, Queen Mary sat immobile, while difficult decisions had to be made on what to do with her. The ship was an immense asset to Britain, an island nation at war. She was the fastest liner in the world, and her speed would make her nearly impossible to catch, even by Germany's fastest surface warships. Her vast size meant she could carry an incredible number of troops. The role of the fast troopship had been perfectly illustrated just over 20 years earlier in the First War, when massive liners had fed Europe's battlefields with a constant stream of troops from the Empire. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, they'd all come by ship, and the big liners played an invaluable role. Mauritania, Olympic, Aquitania, and dozens more of them. The Oceanliner was the perfect tool for the job. Not so for actual fighting. Early experiments with auxiliary cruisers in the First World War had found that the ships were sitting ducks in a proper gunfight. In the Second War, Britain was desperate and put some of its liners into action as convoy escorts and cruisers to disastrous results. By the time Queen Mary was sitting tied up in New York alongside Normandy, the valiant little P&O liner Rawalpindi was lying on the bottom of the ocean, having been sent down there by a pair of German battleships. Queen Mary would need to play her part, but there was a very plain danger. She was fast, yes, but one unlucky encounter with a U-boat could be the end. The Cunard Line knew all about that. In 1915, their darling, Lusitania, was caught and sunk, even though she was one of the fastest ships in the world. They wouldn't let it happen again. Queen Mary was somewhat more fortunate than Queen Elizabeth, her running mate. It was just being finished up by her builders when war was declared. She dashed across the Atlantic in history's strangest maiden crossing without having even undergone proper trials, with her windows and portholes blacked out and her staterooms empty of passengers. She arrived alongside Queen Mary and Normandy, and there they were, the only time the three largest superliners of the 30s would ever be seen together. The Elizabeth's dash across the Atlantic is an epic story, one we'll cover in a future video, but for now, Cunard and the British Admiralty had to do something with their liners. New York was a neutral port and the ships could only stay there for so long. The liners would need extensive conversion to become troop carriers, but the work couldn't be done in the US. That would violate neutrality laws. The work couldn't be done in England or Scotland either. Germany was poised to invade France and Belgium. Taking France would mean the Luftwaffe's bombers could easily take full advantage of the nation's airfields and put Britain and all its big shipyards within reach. Queen Mary would have to go farther afield for conversion works, and it doesn't get much farther afield from Europe than Sydney, Australia. In April 1940, excited Sydney-siders awoke to an incredible sight. There, swinging at anchor in the middle of Sydney Harbour near Taronga Zoo, was one of the world's largest passenger liners. This was a bizarre sight. A ship of that size and sheer scale just hadn't been seen in that part of the world before. In fact, the largest liners that usually visited Sydney from Britain were about a third of the Queen's size. But there she was, her brilliant peacetime colour scheme greyed out, her towering Cunard red funnels painted over with a drab scheme instead. Her arrival had been entirely unannounced. Under cover of strict secrecy, the great ship had steamed at speed, averaging 27 knots over 14,000 miles for weeks, and arrived simply without warning. The citizens of Sydney were thrilled. Ferries ran regular trips, circling the massive liner, and thousands crowded aboard to peer up curiously at her riveted steel hull. But this was not a joyous peacetime visit. The Queen Mary's very arrival signalled the start of something huge and horrific, a true global conflict. The ship was designed to run back and forth across the Atlantic. That she was here, tens of thousands of miles away, meant that something was clearly terribly wrong. But still, the city welcomed the ship with open arms. That and her smaller running mate, Mauritania, only just recently completed, which bobbed slowly at anchor in the harbour as well. The ships were here to undergo enormous change. To properly serve the Empire, they would need to be able to carry the maximum number of troops. After all, based on experience in the last war, battles could be expected to break out across Europe and the Mediterranean. The Cunard Queens were so big they could accommodate the better part of a division's worth of men for a single trip, but only if their interiors were drastically altered. All the conversion work had to be done with an eventual peacetime in mind as well. Queen Mary had been decorated by a team of artisans, and her lavish interiors were renowned. All of it had to be carefully stripped out. The plush chairs, the artworks, the statues. As Queen Mary swung at her anchor, squat barges came alongside to receive heavy loads of the fittings and the decor that had made the ship a favourite on the transatlantic run. The barges chugged over to docks where trucks took their loads away for storage in warehouses to await the far-off day that Queen Mary might be able to return to happy passenger service in peace. It's probable that nobody actually unloading the ship that autumn can have possibly imagined that peace would still be over half a decade away. With the furnishings and decor securely locked away at the Grace Brothers storage warehouses, proper work could begin in earnest on converting the liner into a troopship. Single cabins were turned into dormitories as wooden bunks were fitted by their hundreds. The elaborate and towering first-class dining saloon became the mess hall, while conversely, the smaller tourist-class saloon was reserved for officers. Across the ship, sandbags blocked up the bigger windows to protect them from shrapnel damage should a bomb hit. Anti-aircraft guns were bolted to the deck plates. The ship would be expected to carry far more people than she would in peacetime, so toilet and bathing facilities would need to be expanded drastically, and so too would the kitchens and the galleys. Externally though, the ship was little changed aside from her grey paint scheme. The grey was chosen because it was actually remarkably effective at obscuring the ship from view in most ocean conditions. In the First World War, troopships had been painted in dazzling schemes designed to obfuscate their size and direction of travel to watching U-boat crews, but an all-grey scheme was easier to maintain and it actually helped the ships blend in well with sea and sky. There was one other curious addition though, noticeable even to the casual observer. To protect against magnetic mines, a degaussing cable was wrapped around the hull. Magnetic mines were designed to detonate when they detected changes in the Earth's magnetic field. When a ship's steel hull passed overhead, the steel itself distorted the local magnetic field, creating a signature that could trigger the mines even without physical contact. Ships naturally become magnetized during construction and while they're sailing because the steel hull aligns to the Earth's magnetic field. So to protect against the mines, the ship's magnetic signature itself needed to be drastically reduced or even neutralized. Degaussing coils were essentially heavy-gauge electrical cables installed around the ship's hull. They were arranged carefully in loops and they connected to a power source that passed a carefully controlled direct current through them. This current created a kind of artificial magnetic field opposite in polarity to the ship's own magnetic field, and by adjusting the current strength and direction, the ship's total magnetic signature could be reduced to just a fraction of its natural level, below the triggering threshold for a mine. With the degaussing cables fitted, Queen Mary could pass right over most magnetic mines without setting the things off. So it was that the Queen Mary of May 1940 was a very different ship to the one that had arrived the previous month. In peacetime, she'd been expected to carry a little over 3,200 passengers and crew. Now, that number had been increased dramatically to around 6,000 or 7,000. The work had been finished quickly, and just as well. With German troops set to pour into France, Queen Mary would soon be tasked with her first wartime voyage. Across Australia and New Zealand, thousands and thousands of troops were mobilised and destined to fight in support of Britain on the home front. Queen Mary's first trooping voyage was about to begin, but so too were the darkest days of Britain's war, when invasion seemed inevitable and German bombs would rain down day and night. Between the Mary and Europe were tens of thousands of miles of open ocean, a deadly efficient fleet of submarines and fast warships that hunted merchant ships with greed, and a thinly stretched Royal Navy that could only do its best to stop the slaughter. Hitler and his navy were not ignorant to Queen Mary's vital role as a troop ship. Her destruction would be an enormous strategic and propaganda victory, and she would become a priority target. So began Queen Mary's wartime career and her long pathway to glory. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. As always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.